Hello, I'm Erin Sikorsky. I direct the Center for Climate and Security. And in terms of the one thing that I think the NATO Center of Excellence on Climate and Security could best contribute to would be to develop a series of best practices for integrating climate adaptation in particular into alliance partners and militaries writ large. And when I say climate adaptation, what I'm focused on is not the mitigation side, the energy piece, but really adapting to the changes that are already here and will be here in the next few decades, even if all emissions were cut tomorrow, given the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere. And I think these best practices should stretch from the operational level, the day to day, to the strategic planning level. I think there's a lot of work that the center could do to convene across militaries to identify what they're already doing and what's working and where their gaps are, both, again, in terms of how do they operate in harsher environments, but then also how do they make strategic decisions about where to think about risks of conflict or how to change their planning going forward. Because these are places in which I think militaries are struggling a bit. They all understand, or not all, but many now understand the risks, the security risks associated with climate change. And there's a lot of discussion also on the mitigation side about switching to clean energy. But what's less clear, I think, is how do militaries need to adapt, and how does the alliance need to adapt its work in the face of these more near-term risks. And there isn't existing a good place to share that information, to talk about what's working, what isn't, to investigate and research best practices. So I think that would be a huge value add for the center, and something that is currently missing, not only within the alliance, but just broadly within the military community as it looks at climate security issues. So that's my recommendation for the center going forward.
I'm John Furlow. I'm the director of the International Research Institute for Climate and Society, part of Columbia University's new climate school. One of the things that I think would be really valuable for the NATO Center of Excellence to look into is a deeper understanding of the drivers of instability and insecurity that concerns NATO and other organizations. If we think about human insecurity, things like the need to migrate or food insecurity, political instability, it'd be great to understand what are some of the drivers that underlie those risks. If you think about something like food security, there may be a number of reasons that people are food insecure in a particular area. It may be that they grow their own food and they're having weather problems, a drought, too much rain, something like that. In cities and other areas, people rely a lot more on trading for food, importing food. So it'd be great to understand if the problem in a certain area is driven by trade disruptions. Is there a problem with growing in a place that exports food, or is there a problem with the trade route? Are the roads washed out? Something like that. With migration, we did some work at the IRI a few years ago where we were beginning to look at breaking down the causes of migration out of Central America so that we could better understand really what makes people take the risk to get up and leave home and try to get to the United States. Once we broke things down, we could begin analyzing which factors are forecastable and which are not. And so with a lot of these instabilities and insecurities, if we really break down the underlying causes of these things, for some of them, we may be able to forecast them. The climate science has come a long way, and we are pretty good at forecasting things like drought or excess rains on a seasonal basis, which aligns nicely with a growing season or a malaria season, a vector-borne disease season. So it would be really nice if the Center of Excellence could help the research community understand, first of all, what are the priorities for the security community, and then what are the risks that underlie those priorities so that we can see whether we can forecast it. We've heard for a long time that climate change is a threat multiplier, but I think the climate science has come a long way. And if we really break down what we mean by climate as a threat multiplier, we could begin to understand really how climate multiplies the threats that we're concerned about.
My name is Jamie Shea. I'm a former Deputy Assistant Secretary General of NATO, where I was responsible for emerging security challenges, including climate change and energy security. Since retiring from NATO, I've been a fellow at a think tank in Brussels called Friends of Europe, and I've also served as the Secretary General of the Global Military Advisory Council on climate change. Like many of us in the climate change and security world, I'm excited and highly encouraged by Canada's offer to establish a centre of excellence on climate change and security for NATO. I see this new institution playing an absolutely key role, and in three areas. The first and primary one is helping NATO to connect to the climate change and security community. All of the academic institutions, the think tanks, the NGOs that have been in this business for far longer than NATO and can give NATO valuable guidance as to where climate change scenarios are likely to impact on security, affecting allies and partners, and to help NATO to build the knowledge and the expertise. I would hope also that as this relationship develops, NATO would be able to use its big data analytics, its Science for Peace and Security program, which brings scientists together, and its satellite and meteorological sensor capabilities to feed up-to-date information and early warning into this broader community. Climate change cannot be addressed by NATO alone. It is very much a team effort. And although NATO has made a good start, it's still a young entrant into the climate change and security world. It has only had an action plan for 1 year and a threat assessment for slightly longer. And so there is still much work to do on behalf of the Alliance to build that ecosystem. And I see the convening power of the centre as playing a key role. Two other things which I believe the centre could usefully take on. One is to develop education and training programs in climate security for NATO's military personnel at all levels, from leadership to the common soldier, which could be taught both at the centre but also rolled out in NATO military academies like the NATO Defence College or the NATO School in Omer Ammergau and in national staff colleges as well. Finally, I would hope that the centre could also every year hold a major conference where it could bring the NATO leadership together with climate change and security experts to check on the latest state of play and also to give NATO valuable feedback as to how its climate change endeavours are being perceived and received by the broader expert community. So I think that's enough to get the centre off to a good start. But as I've said, I'm very encouraged by the fact that we will have a centre and also encouraged by the large number of allies that have shown interest in joining Canada in staffing the centre and getting it up and running. Thank you.
So to the question, what is one of the key issues that the NATO Center of Excellence should tackle in regards to climate security? Let me maybe first start with saying that it's like widely acknowledged now that there is a link between climate and conflict. Of course, very complex interactions on how climate exacerbates conflict. But I think in this discussion, it's really important to think about the root causes, addressing root causes versus addressing consequences, right? So there's different pathways that lead from climate to conflict, be it the food security pathway, the scarce resources, or even abundance of resources. So the question then for me is really what this center should answer is, how would a peace and security operation mission look like if we knew about the climate security nexus? So what would we be doing different, right? As I said, we cannot just only address the consequences, but we need to understand and also address the root causes. While maybe NATO operations are more on the consequences, they need to be informed by its root causes. So that's why I think the things that the center should address is the evidence. So we need to have more evidence on the climate security nexus. We need to know what leads to what in order then also to program our responses. But for that, also we need to increase the capacity, because potentially many people that work in those peace and security operations and missions, they lack the understanding of the climate security and how all those linkages interact. So it's about evidence, it's about capacity building, and maybe it's about simulations. NATO and partners, they're very good in simulation. So how can we simulate such crises that include climate? Because if climate, of course, also is involved and is an important factor, I mean, you can't fight against climate like any other enemy. So also for people to really understand how to react and program in such circumstances. So it's really to understand how to inform operations and programming in peace and security of NATO and partners better. Understanding the root causes, so that we can link addressing the root causes with the consequences.
Hi, my name is Jeanette Jackson, CEO of Foresight Canada. We are thrilled to see NATO accept Canada's offer to host a Climate Change and Security Centre of Excellence, and to see Canada take a leading role in establishment of this organization. The creation of this centre will raise awareness of the challenges posed by climate change globally and offer a safe space for countries to collaborate and find solutions to today's most pressing climate challenges. One of the stated purposes of the COE is to enhance the security of Canada, NATO's members, and people around the world. As a collection of some of the world's most advanced militaries, NATO has the opportunity to use that power to help and protect the most vulnerable among us. Research has shown that the effects of climate change often disproportionately impact the communities that do not have the resources to prepare for and recover from things like heat waves, drought, flooding, wildfires, storms, etc. Those communities need support to prepare, rebuild, and possibly relocate refugees in severe cases of disruption caused by climate change. We hope the NATO Centre of Excellence will be used to develop a plan to ensure the most marginalized populations are not left behind in the green transition. As countries draft policies and develop technologies to establish climate resiliency, like stormproof infrastructure, we should all do what we can to ensure that those that do not have access to those resources are not left to bear the brunt of climate change effects alone. At Foresight, we are working hard to establish Canada as a world leader in the development and export of clean technologies. If we can achieve that goal, we can help countries around the world decarbonize industry and reduce emissions with made in Canada solutions, potentially mitigating the worst effects of climate change. But we have to act fast. We have already experienced a number of what could be world once-in-a-lifetime disasters right here in Canada. The effects of climate change are growing more severe every year, and we need to take action. We hope the COE gives us the opportunity to collaborate as a global community so that we can meet the most pressing challenges. Finally, one consideration that we believe needs a lot of reflection is on how many barriers to sharing IP should be implemented given the unimaginable impacts of climate change. If we do not have open source to technologies, whether it's reclamation, nature-based solutions, how will that impact the long-term global health, migration, prevention and adaptation, water, food security, and more globally? We need to protect our IP, and we also need to ensure that everyone has access to the tools, technologies, and solutions they need to manage this global crisis. Thank you.
I am Georgios Kostakos. I am the Executive Director of FOGS, the Foundation for Global Governance Sustainability, based in Brussels. And I'm glad for this opportunity to contribute to your thinking about the new Center of Excellence for NATO. I think there is a lot that this center can do to help the militaries reduce their emissions in terms of carbon emissions, which affect, of course, climate change, and to adapt to climate change, their operations, their installations, and all other aspects of their work. So these two big areas, I think, offer the opportunity to collect good practices in both of these and to share them across NATO, across the member states. Because, for example, in the area of reduction of emissions, which is the mitigation area, we can see good practices being developed in terms of manufacturing of equipment, in terms of operating equipment, like the technical specifications of fuel for the vehicles and the planes and other equipment. Also the actual manufacturing and the methods that are used by the industry associated with the militaries to produce all this equipment, and of course during exercises, etc., the use of the equipment and the explosive, etc., can also be studied and ways found to reduce significantly the emissions in terms of CO2 and other greenhouse gases. There is an important element there that countries often do not report or underreport the emissions from the military. That is also a matter that has to be dealt with in terms of transparency. There are civil society organizations who have been demanding more transparency in that regard and commitments in the framework of UNFCCC. I'm sure governments and NATO would benefit from goodwill, public goodwill, if they proceeded to make more precise announcements and also announce the measures taken to reduce the emissions. In the field of adaptation, we can talk about good practices in terms of placement of installations close to the sea, especially with the sea level rise. Installations may have to be moved or ways found to elevate, let's say, some sensitive equipment. Also, in terms of temperature increase, there has to be attention paid to possibility of a malfunctioning of electronics or explosives and other elements of the military because of these new temperatures that often exceed the safe range that has been foreseen at the manufacturing of the equipment. Also, in terms of floods and fires, if often installations are surrounded by forests and there is an increased now incidence of wildfires, there has to be a clear zone, and the explosive depots have to be again clear from such possibilities of being affected by fires or floods, etc. For all this, the center could have surveys among the members of NATO, what they do. After good categorization, a good classification of the possible dangers and possible actions in both of these areas, mitigation, adaptation, and then collect good practices, disseminate those good practices through training and brainstorming sessions, etc. I'm at your disposal if you need to discuss this or other things related further. Thank you.
My name is Erin Myers. I'm the Director of Environment, Climate Change, and Emergency Management for the Métis National Council. And upon reflection of the question, I think in my perspective, I think the most important piece is to be inclusive. The climate dialogue, the security dialogue, you tend to have a lot of the same experts around the table, whether it's scientists or academics or policy folks or the federal government. But really, when we're talking about climate and security, we need to ensure that, a variety of voices, a variety of expertise, and in this particular case, the Métis Nation or Indigenous peoples are included in this important work. Indigenous peoples bring a lot of insight, knowledge to the table that can be of great resources and great support to advance this work. Climate is impacting all people, all communities around the world, and is having an impact on the security of our nations. And I think that to ensure that we are addressing these concerns, we need to make sure that we are being diverse and having equitable access to the conversation and and ensuring it's not just the same people around the table having the same conversations in order to move the needle on climate action, but also to ensure that in that process we are providing safety and security for our citizens.